Oops. All right, everybody. Welcome back to the House Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. We're in this afternoon session here going to pick up our conversation on S39. I asked Michael Fisher, the Office of the Healthcare Advocate, to take a look at this issue that we had discussed briefly about what happens if we offer members of the legislature access to the state employees' benefits and they lose their subsidies. What's kind of the relative options for the folks? I thought the easiest way to understand that without breaking that down every single possible scenario is just to take a look at a couple, because none of us, I think, are healthcare experts, but we have one in the room. So thank you, Michael, for being with us. So if you'd introduce yourself and
happy to be here.
Through this, that'd be helpful.
Happy to be here. Mike Fisher, healthcare advocate.
So yeah, I think we spent a little bit of time, asked a staff member to spend a little bit of time with what seems like a simple question, how to compare what families would get out on the exchange, families who have no employer-sponsored insurance, what their costs and benefits would be as compared to what was contemplated in the giving legislators access to the state employees plan with a 20% cost going to them. And so you have on your committee webpage a document that looks like this that lays out 3 different scenarios. And I'm going to go back to something I said last week. Have you ever heard that healthcare is confusing, complicated? We did our best to simplify it in a way that could be straightforward for you. But I want to let you know that my staff person put sort of spelled out. There's many more details not shown on this page. Not surprisingly, what we sort of expected to see before this analysis is that there are some winners and there are some losers. And I don't know whether your version is in color, but you'll see on the green cells are sort of the simple analysis of who would be paying less premiums. And so you can see that for the individual making $30,000 a year, significantly, other than the platinum, they're going to be saving money on premiums, staying where they are without employer-sponsored insurance. Now, let's just recognize that it is a significantly lower value plan that they're with than they would be in Vermont in the state employees plan. People are, from the health policy perspective, and honestly, for somebody who runs a helpline who's trying to help people pay their bills, we often lament that people have low value plans. We are frustrated every day when people are frustrated every day when they have a $15,000 deductible. And we are often have a mindset that people should have a higher value plan. But when you're low income and you're relatively healthy, it's the premium you're thinking about. It's really just the premium you're thinking about. Now, of course, you can step off a curb and, sprain your ankle, injure yourself or get a bad diagnosis, and that calculation changes significantly. But for many people, the decision to get maybe I'll put it this way. I understand the economic decision to buy a lower value plan that is a plan that has lower premiums and higher cost sharing. I'm rattling on here a little bit. It's complicated. There are winners and losers in both scenarios. 1 and 2, I think it's simpler in scenario 3, those are the winners. And then let me just add another detail I haven't mentioned one bit here. That's going to make this analysis even harder going forward. We are currently living in an environment with enhanced rater premium tax credits that were originally passed in ARPA. They will be in effect for 24 and 25. Budget Council's shaking her head at me, 24 and 25. We don't know whether they will be in place after 25. If anyone here can tell me what the political makeup of Congress will be in that time frame, I could tell you, I could give you some guess as to whether they will continue, but that decision will add to the unknowns, will be an unknown in comparing what a health benefit would look like for legislators as compared to the marketplace.
Representative Cooper.
So this is a real problem. I wonder if you opt for the lower tangible metal plan and then actually have some healthcare expenditure that is significant, you're going bankrupt that way as opposed to bankrupt this way. Jen shot me a comment that I don't know if she was serious or not, but is there a way we could do this sort of on a graduated fee scale thing for members who are, that doesn't exist in the state employee because, you know, you're all significantly above a particular wage level, but if members here are not, would we get in trouble by subsidizing?
Well, no, I think some employers do give a health benefit based on some recognition of ability to pay. That is, the employee share is based on the ability to pay. There's nothing prohibiting that. I know some employers do that.
Same plan, just subsidies.
But so the right thing to say is there are some considerations, there are some options. I understand there's some discussion about taking some time to evaluate the complexity of this, and I think with that time you'd be able to explore those kinds of possibilities.
My hope for our discussion today was that you could share that there are a lot, that this is even more complicated than many of us thought coming into this. And I think that there was almost a universal conversation in the building about how it would be pretty straightforward to offer legislators access to the state employees' health plan at the same split that state employees have. This discovery that it would have a pretty negative impact, at least on premiums, when you're just comparing premiums for relatively healthy legislators who lost their subsidies because their employer was offering them access to this health benefit. So I just wanted to at least get on the table before we talk about the amendment that I want to lay before everybody why this conversation about punting for a year came up with Representative Houghton and other members that were concerned that we would be doing some damage to some of our colleagues, at least on the premium affordability question. Representative Houghton.
That's his way of saying it. Thanks a lot.
I didn't see
Skimmed this quickly, didn't see the ratio of winners to losers. Did you? Do you? No.
Well, so in order to understand how many legislators would win or lose, you'd have to know the legislators' family incomes, not just legislators' incomes, but their family.
Yeah.
And so that's not an easy thing for any employer to evaluate.
Any other questions for Mr. Fisher? Michael, thank you for doing this. It, in my eyes, a lot. I really appreciate you and your staff going through the exercise. It really was very helpful.
Thank you. Good luck.
So Jen, would you come and walk us through this amendment language, please? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jen Carby, Legislative Counsel. I come to you today with a new draft amendment. This is draft 2.1. It's posted on the committee page. And I've just highlighted in yellow everything that is new since the last amendment. So you don't have to look through and try to figure out what else has changed. So it's everything we had looked at last week around the clarification about allowance and reimbursement, some of the changes there. And then we get to some new instances on pages 4 and 5. On page 4, this would add to the Legislative Service Working Group a new subdivision in their list of things to look at, which would be to look at the impact of making members eligible for the state employees health plan as set forth in section 1 of the act as it came over, bill as it came over from the Senate, on members of different income levels. So kind of what Mike's talking about, maybe not as specific as knowing what the actual experience would be for each member of the General Assembly, because that would really be very personal based on family circumstances. But at least understanding in more detail what the impact would be on members depending on income level and family composition, and then just relettering the remaining subdivisions to be alphabetically correct. Then the fourth instance is the same as we had looked at before, changing the 8 meetings to 6 meetings based on what Senate Appropriations had originally intended. And then the fifth instance of amendment would be to strike out section 7, the appropriation. The only appropriation, the only funding needed for this bill in FY24 was for the health coverage, half year of health coverage starting in January. So if we take that out, there is no appropriation needed. And then in the sixth instance of amendment, in the effective dates, this one requires a little explanation, but we would strike out subsections B and C and put back in just a B and then reletter everything. This has the result of striking out the specific provision, making health benefits effective on January 1st, 2024, and instead they would fall to the default of the remaining sections shall take effect on January 1st, 2025. We take out the specific reference and then it gets folded into that remaining sections on January 1st, 2025. So the impact here is that it would delay the health benefits for a year until January 1st, 2025, and direct the study committee to be looking at it in 2023 and come back for the 24 session with their findings and recommendations on a bunch of things, including health insurance.
Jen, questions for Jen about the words on the page? It's always a little interesting when you're doing something by its absence that has the effect. So,
Yes.
So that was confusing to me on first read, but you explained it very well.
Okay.
Two big changes are adding language to specifically direct the working group to look at these issues around healthcare, and then moving it so that the healthcare eligibility goes out to 2025 and syncs up with the graduated increase in pay.
Yes, we sync up with the graduated increase in pay and the year of adjournment pay beginning. And then the result is that we don't need an appropriation for FY24.
Representative Pengel.
So still trying to kind of wrap my head around that we're getting back to discussing this because maybe because I wasn't here, I had gotten a group text that said it was off, S39 was off the agenda. So I wasn't really thinking about it, you know, in any terms over the weekend, like trying to come up with questions or to understand this better. So this is coming at us from the angle that we don't want to harm people who may be making too much money to take advantage of a health plan. I don't know. What is this amendment trying to do?
So this amendment is trying to give the legislative service working group the opportunity to weigh in before the eligibility that the Senate's version of this bill for access to the state employees plan for legislators goes into effect, because what we heard from Mr. Fisher and caused a lot of conversation that had me take this off the agenda on Friday so that I had a little bit of time to talk with Representative Houghton and other legislators that understand what this issue is better than I do. The impact on specific kinds of legislators depending on their income and what they're buying.
That's what I mean.
Now, right? So this just pushes all that to 2025. so that the legislative service working group can take time, and that even if, we decide to make that benefit available, at least it would coincide with some graduated increase in pay that would help to defray the increased costs to those folks that are in the gap.
Okay, so yeah, I guess that's what I meant by certain people would get harmed by this, because there is a sort of benefits cliff that you're trying to avoid by pushing this off. But even if it does get pushed off, there's still going to be a benefits cliff. So don't we have legislation somewhere on the wall? I can't read bill numbers from here that protects, if we took up a bill, it would, and passed it, it would protect legislators who are employed and already have healthcare insurance. So we wouldn't even have to worry about this in a lot of cases.
I think that'd be a great thing for us to take up to complement this work, actually.
So I just want to clarify that people who have members who have employer-sponsored insurance now wouldn't experience a change if they wanted to stay on their employer-sponsored plan. The real issue that we are focusing on here is people who are getting exchange plans through Vermont Health Connect and receiving subsidies because they don't have an affordable offer of employer-sponsored insurance currently. This offering the state employees plan to legislators is likely to be considered under federal law an offer of employer-sponsored insurance that would be in I think all of the scenarios that Mike's group worked out would be considered affordable under the federal definition, which would make people ineligible for subsidies. And so for those folks, it would be more expensive to try to purchase coverage through the state employees plan than it would be to continue to get their exchange plans with subsidies. The issue is that the exchange plans with subsidies is mainly federal. So short of the state backfilling to help anybody who couldn't afford the state employees plan, or allowing them to stay on exchange plans with the state making up the difference in subsidies, that's the group we're trying to identify.
I guess I don't have any more comments on that because I don't really understand what we're doing other than pushing out a year for a group to think about this and try to come up with a solution. But I don't see any solution that's going to be easily achieved unless it's just offering somebody a certain amount of money to make up the difference between the subsidy and what they would have to pay to get on a group plan, correct?
I think those are kind of the things that we are asking the working group to do if we adopt this amendment. I mean, Representative Hooper actually kind of hinted at one possible solution, and I don't even know if it's practical, but to say, we could create some kind of a sliding scale for the employee contribution. That's something that we could consider. I don't know how that would work, and it would deviate from the state employees plan, and that'd be something we'd want to consider. So part of my thinking is just take these questions and give us some more time on it, but start moving in that direction. Representative Hooper.
But because of funding and budget issues, the 2025 date is pretty much locked in. Even if our best and brightest minds on a legislative working group come up with something, it's going to have to go through budget.
I think the other piece with the 2025 timing is, as the chair said, that the compensation begins to increase in 2025. So folks who are eligible for subsidies now may be eligible for less in the way of subsidies as their legislative income increases.
Other questions for Jen? All right. So committee, we have discussed this a little bit the other day. I think with this change, it's less of an immediate impact, but I think that it's important that we give this working group time to take up some of the questions from what we've heard from our colleagues. We've seen with legislators who are leaving legislative service all too soon because they just can't make this work. That's one of my motivations with moving through. Representative Hango.
So by passing this amendment, the bill would just not deal with healthcare benefits at all. That wouldn't be on the table right now.
Nope.
They're just going to be studied, basically kicking that can down the road.
Yeah, the eligibility is kicked to 2025. So this would, absent any other change, eligibility would go into effect when the graduated pay increases begin in 2025.
And all the other provisions of the bill that we discussed on Thursday would be the same as whatever we ended up with on Thursday, which I don't really remember.
Right. The first pieces of the amendments address a bunch of issues that Mr. Ferrant had found in the reimbursement language. We kind of clarified that and created some equity there. So all those pieces are the not highlighted sections of the amendment that's before us, right, Jen? Other discussion? Mr. Morowicki, would you like to motion?
Before
I would.
that,
Hold on one second, Mike.
so are we voting on the amendment now or the actual bill?
I would entertain a motion, absent objection, for just to take one vote on this. If the committee supports the amendment,
The bill as. Can I speak to the underlying amendment?
yeah. There you go. Given that I think all of us have thought about this a lot. Yes, Representative Hagan.
Forgive my frustration with this, but I did not think about this because I thought it was tabled or shelved until next session. And I don't know where I got that, but I assumed, I guess, from a text message or an email that we got.
I think that I made it pretty clear to the folks who were here on Friday that while I was taking it off the agenda for the day, that it was to try to find a way to address this particular healthcare problem.
Okay, so my bad, because I wasn't here on Friday and didn't get that message. So I understand that there is language or something from the Vermont Futures Caucus that addresses this bill that I don't know anything about. And it was supposed to have been sent to our committee, so maybe I missed that too on Friday. Is that available to look at? I can't find it anywhere.
I haven't seen anything from the Futures Caucus.
Okay, because I believe it specifically dealt with legislative compensation.
I knew that
Anybody else? Is anybody here on the Futures Caucus?
Yes.
And is there a letter or an amendment?
Representative Williams, do you know the answer to this question?
Hi, would you introduce yourself for the record, Representative Williams?
Students that I just happen to be here. Second favorite committee. Representative Williams, Berry City, the Vermont Future Caucus submitted a letter signed by more than 30 plus members of the Senate and House endorsing this specific bill. And a very big.
There wasn't any proposed.
There was no proposed language. It simply endorsed the bill and asked that it be passed this year and this biennium.
And who did this letter go to, Representative Williams?
It was sent to the Speaker of the House, and I believe some members of this committee were copied on the message to the House leadership.
Hey, do you know who would have sent that? Because I can check my email to make sure I'm not being obtuse here and I didn't receive it.
I sent the letter.
Okay, so it would be coming from Representative Williams?
It would, though there are two of us.
Right. Okay, thank you. Because I'd really like to see what you're all advocating for. I mean, we took this bill up 4 different times and they were 4 days in a row last week. And I think 3 days last week and 1 day the week before. And that was my objection last week on Thursday, that we have not really taken a lot of testimony on this bill from very many people. And I feel like it's really being rushed through and the process of it I say this every year at this time of year, but this one really, I mean,
We had
I've
this
expressed my discouragement with this.
heard loud and clear.
Thanks.
So my motion on the table.
So is your motion to find the amendment draft 2.1?
And the underlying.
Sorry, hold on a second. I'm looking at the wrong. I was looking at the wrong thing. Yes, draft 2.1 of S39.
We can make it 2.2. I'll make it clean.
Thank you.
Take the highlighting off.
So that would be the same language as 2.1, but 2.2 would be no highlights.
I want to thank the chair for taking this up and for the feedback from people who have gone, left the legislature because of the circumstances that put them in, for the opportunity it can provide, I think, for future legislators as well. It's probably been 10, 20 years since we've done anything in this regard. Don't want to rush into things, but 20 years seems like enough time, and I'm ready to vote for this.
Representative Higgins?
Yeah, just to make a few last comments. I mentioned it last week in regards to, Article 7 of our Vermont Constitution, which is the Common Benefit Clause, which basically says we shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be setting ourselves up for better health care than our constituency, in a sense. And I think the optics of it are terrible. I think when we're looking at, and I'm not sure now with the paid sick and family leave bill, possibly not going forward, but I think we were looking at close to $400 million of new taxes, fees, and costs for programs. So to have that sort of a message out there to our constituency, and I've certainly heard from my constituency even since last week, it's bad optics to impose that on Vermonters, whether it's DMB fees, whether it's professional fees through OPR that we're going to take up again here on 305. And then to give ourselves a package like this is unconscionable in my mind. And I think, I think we have a pretty diverse legislature now, and people who run know what they're running for. They should be responsible enough to understand what the benefits are, what the time commitment is, and so on. And to come here and make an effort to change it all because it doesn't meet current whims of a lot of folks is, in my mind, not appropriate. And if that's the case, then I think other states have possibly done this, set up an independent commission or whatever to look into this rather than ourselves. I think it was interesting that, the senator that presented the sheriff's bill initially stated there's no other organization or group in the state of Vermont that can give themselves raises the way that the Caledonia Sheriff did. And lo and behold, we're doing it to ourselves.
Well, I would argue that the Caledonia Sheriff was able to just give themselves the money. We have to have a thoughtful discussion in multiple committees and then publicly vote. And that's part of the reason why.
I'm not going to argue. I'm just telling you my opinion as to why I'm voting no. And that's it.
Understood. Representative Morgan.
Yes, I mean, along that same vein, we had a legislative update in Milton on Saturday, and a couple of folks caught me after, and somebody actually asked about it. They said, "Hey, is that going anywhere?" And I said, "Well, I don't think so." But then, because I thought it was off the table, is the way I'd understood. But anyway, regardless, and basically stated that I don't. Over the course of the time and how rapidly, because he asked me about what are the rough numbers, and they're essentially by 3 years from now, it's almost 100% increase in pay. And he said, "How can you do that?" I said, "Well, we can." But again, using Mark's words, optics, he said he feels that's bad optics. And he said, I have a feeling if you put that to a, not a public debate, but before pre-COVID, remember there used to be a lot of public hearings on bills. He said, "I bet you if you put that for a public hearing, there'd be a lot of backlash." And I said, "Don't know, but you could be right." So I'm just putting that in the for whatever it's worth category.
Anybody else have any comments? Representative Byron.
So what I found out as I have this conversation with people in my area and actually outside of it, I have a very broad friend and relationship network throughout the state, is most people who think the idea of giving a percentage raise kind of articulated, like Representative Higley said, where it's 100%, they think that that's like 50 to 100,000. When we tell them that we make like 13.5 with some expenses, their jaw dropped. So educating the public, I think, to what the wages are here is one of the key factors for them understanding. I think going from 13 and loose change to whatever it may be, 28-ish is certainly not unconscionable. I think it's barely survival.
So I just want to be clear in the bill, the only person who's increased is that much, I think, is the Speaker of the House. So for legislators, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the fully phased in weekly increase goes from the 800 or so now to 1,210.
That brings it up to,
In 2025, I think 2026, another couple, 300s.
Yeah, it goes to 1,000, 1,100, and then the max at 2027, when you go all the way in, is 1,210, unless you're the Speaker of the House.
okay. So maybe I was even getting my numbers wrong.
Yeah, so it's still, I mean, we're still talking about, we're still talking about
Finish my
the
statement.
pay, yeah, well, but go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was leaving it with the, like, I certainly don't see it as unconscionable. I see it as barely survivable.
So I think we're all gonna have pretty different views, depending on where we sit and who we represent on this. And where I come down is, this is really about trying to make a response, a step toward a response to what I saw and what the leadership saw last biennium in a legislative survey. And then what we saw with a number of legislators who were just like, I can't make this work. Like, I've done a little bit of service for 1 or 2 terms and then I'm done. And I feel pretty strongly that the most important part of this isn't the health insurance in 2025 or the little modest pay increase from 25 to 27. I think the most important part is to say, let's take a little bit of time for a few legislators to get together and say, should we recommend some things for this committee to consider next year, in the next couple of years, about the structure of how this works and could it work better? So I actually feel like the optics of trying to have a more inclusive legislature are great. And when I talk to people, I think a lot of people start with the assumption that we're full-time, that we have access to benefits, and that we have staff. And, I think that a lot of people start with that assumption. And that's part of where the pushback about us giving ourselves any kind of a raise, because that's always the headline if every 5 or so years. I think the last really major change was in 2005. So a couple of years ago, when we did that small little increase in terms of what we were hitching to, and we hitched to executive officers, I had so many conversations with people, and the reaction initially to our pay increase was bad. I'll acknowledge that. But then when I told them how little we make, they were like, oh, well, I thought you guys got paid like $100,000 a year. Nope, that's not how it works. So I think these conversations are good for us to have. I think we shouldn't be afraid to have these conversations with ourselves, with our constituents. And what this is about for me is really delving into that conversation with this working group. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they come back with. All right. I think we've beat this to death. Anybody else? Representative Hennigan.
You say we beat this to death, but we've hardly talked about this at all. I mean, we can stretch out other bills for weeks and weeks and weeks and talk about them. And we have barely talked about this concept at all in this committee. You may have talked about it with every single other member of leadership across chambers.
I'll recognize you next.
But I just can't believe that you think that we've talked about this enough to vote on something that's this important and that may potentially reflect poorly on you yourself. Legislator gives himself a raise.
I actually think we're giving the next General Assembly a raise, so I will go out there and talk to my constituents about
Great.
that. Representative Hooper?
I'm sorry to
That's okay.
interject. I was just going to ask you, do you think that there would be any way you would come around as a yes if this bill changed? I mean, I would think not, right?
I don't know. As I said, I gave it zero thought except for the 3 days that we talked about it last week. I have not, this has not been a priority for me. It has not been something that's at the top of my mind that I've been working on. So for me, there's very little information out there that would convince me that I need to vote for this right now.
Representative Wood.
Question for you, Representative. Is there other information you would like to see? I'm thinking back to the presentation that we received from NC.
Yeah, I didn't find that.
Down countrywide.
Yeah.
We're at the bottom of the bucket.
That's good for you to have brought up because I didn't find that particularly helpful. I didn't really particularly care for the way the groupings were because we aren't like any other state. There are a lot of small states and yes, we're like them in certain ways, but in other ways we're not. It's very, very hard with that chart that she gave us to compare apples to apples. So I would have loved to have delved deeper into that with the presenter, but I feel like we just keep getting rushed along with this bill. So for that reason, nothing personally against anybody, but I am not voting for this bill.
Senator Cooper.
The question was, sort of how much have we been exposed to it? I have a bill on the wall that I was one of the first ones that I put in when I came back after this session and noticed the number of people that, not by election or any other reason, we're not here anymore and actually talking to them. I think diversity is a seriously serious issue. And having been lobbyist here 20 years ago when everybody basically looked like me, we've moved in a good direction, but we haven't moved far enough. And I think that a lot of the people that left cited a lot of the reasons we're in this bill for the reason that they could continue to do it. And quite frankly, for us to ignore those issues and basically say to our fellow Vermonters, oh, that's too bad. We're going to move on. You can be replaced. I think is a dereliction of our duty. So I will vote for whatever motion Mr. Murwicki actually made.
Explain me. Representative Quaid.
I agree, and our body has lost a lot of really amazing members due to financial situations around pay. And I think we can all think of our own communities and how there are amazing members of our community that would do great in this role, but they cannot step up and run and possibly win due to pay. So I will be voting yes.
Anybody else? Right. Representative Morton.
I'm just reading the original Senate bill, unless something changed in it, and I'm just looking, unless I've missed something. It says 2025 weekly salary of $12.30, 2026 weekly salary of $15.30.
That is the speaker and pro tem.
That's the speaker and get that. It says, notwithstanding any provision to the contrary, members of the General Assembly other than the Speaker of the House and Senate Pro Tem are entitled to the following weekly amounts, other than.
Right. That's the 1,000 and then 1,100. And then and then in subsection B, you get to the Speaker and Pro Tem who get 1230 and 1530.
Oh, okay, I read over it. Okay, so 1,000 and 1,100. And then 1230, 1530 is them. Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. All right, I read it. Sorry. Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Shall we commence the call roll?
Representative Byron.
Yes.
Representative Boyden, yes. Representative Hager. No. Representative Morgan.
No.
Representative Cooper Brownton.
Yeah.
Representative Murphy.
Yes.
Representative Chase.
Yes.
Representative Waters Evans.
Yes.
Representative Cooper Randall.
No.
Representative Nugent.
Yes.
Representative Higley.
No.
Representative McCarthy.
Yes.
8-1 is
Thank you, everyone, for the thoughtful conversation. Thank you, Jen, for the multiple drafts. I really appreciate it. So while we have a little bit of time here, Jennifer, how long do you think it would take to give us a skim through the changes on 127? Oh, great. All right, then we do have time. Perfect. Mr. Anderson, come on. Come on, Dad. Let's see what the Senate did to our sports betting bill. Yeah. Sorry about that. Representative Nugent has volunteered to report this bill. We will support her in that. That's 39. Thank you very much for being on.
Kate.
All right, good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Office of Legislative Counsel. You have in front of you the Senate's proposals of amendment for H127. And if the committee has it available, it's ready to go. I can work from side by side where I have highlighted each of the changes as the bill came out of the Senate. So starting, we're going to go sequentially through the bill here. In section 1, 31 VSA, section 1302, this is within the section that deals with DLL's authority and duties. The first instance of amendment is in subdivision C5. And this was one of the House Ways and Means amendments. If you recall, they added something where the department would have a process for excluding joint bank accounts. That has been taken out. That was a Senate Economic Development Amendment. All right. Further on in the same section, in subsection G, Senate Economic Development also amended some of the contract provision requirements. So the first instance that I have highlighted, they have eliminated the cooperative clause there, where the department and the operators were going to cooperatively develop an advertising plan. That is now just DLL developing the advertising plan. Subdivision D3 was removed in its entirety. That was the requirement that the contract between DLL and its operators include a cap on the amount spent by the department and the operators on sports wagering advertising. So there will no longer be a requirement that the contract include a cap on advertising spending. Okay, you're all still with me. Section 131 VSA, section 1304. This is just an update to the name of the Sports Wagering Fund. Senate Finance amended this so that it will be called the Sports Wagering Enterprise Fund to be crystal extra clear that this is an enterprise fund.
Love clarity.
Yes. Moving on, section 1320 in Title 31. There were multiple overlapping amendments to the fee proposal as it came out of the House. Both Senate Economic Development and Senate Finance proposed amendments. Senate Finance's amendment was adopted. And that is going to require that the operator fee be paid at the start of the term. And it is going to be a $550,000 fee paid when the contract is offered to the operator. $550,000. That will stretch over a term negotiated between DLL and each operator, but in no event will that term be shorter than 3 years.
Interesting. So, may I? Yeah, please. Okay, so what we're saying here is each operator pays a fee for the total sum of $550,000.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of scaled or graduated to whatever term we want to use at a minimum of 3 years, but it could go out to 6.
Correct. For how frequently the fee needs to be paid by the operator.
Correct. So that calculation is based on the nuance of the contract on the particular operator.
Yes, and the discussion that came up in Senate Finance from DLL and from others who testified is that it may not actually cost the department $550,000 to supervise, work with some operators, and that renewal term may be longer than it needs to be for others. So kind of if you behave, your fee will be applied less frequently than if there's more monitoring and enforcement.
So it's gonna have like a. Keep going, I can think out loud later.
Representative Chase?
You mentioned 6 years. I'm not seeing a max on this, so it could theoretically be 30 years or something.
If that were negotiated between the parties, although that would likely be longer than the contract. So there is, something to be said for that.
Sure.
That the contract is likely going to be shorter than indefinite or 30 years in perpetuity. There's a rule against it in contracts.
I think I'm seeing that it would require at least 3 operators in order to reach the 550 per year if they're each paying only once every 3 years at the minimum.
Yes, but I don't think that's what is intended or what they'll be looking for.
Thank you.
For our jurisdictional purposes, I'm less concerned about this fee structure. I am very interested to hear what Representative Kornheiser's committee thinks about it. I don't see like a problem with it, but it's weird.
It's abstract. It's definitely not the norm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking.
Sure.
That's stock provision anymore.
So, and just so the committee knows, my intent was we would do a quick breeze and then take this up tomorrow to take our opinion on it. So Ways and Means is so we'll come back to this. This won't be our only opportunity to look at the Senate language. And if folks want to hear from the department or anybody else, let me know. It sounds like the biggest changes are in this fee structure, but tell us what else we have coming down our way.
All right. In the same section, this came from an amendment from individual senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee. This requires the board to adopt procedures governing the review and consideration of criminal background checks as a component of the competitive bidding process. The procedures will establish standards for determining whether an applicant should not be selected as an operator due to the criminal history of the applicant's principals or other individuals who control the operator applicant. It requires the operators to submit fingerprint-based criminal history records and allows the department to access those records through VCIC. However, in subsection F, there's a notwithstanding clause that allows the department to accept third-party criminal background checks if they are sufficient.
Representative Waters, I've been sorry, it's reading.
No, that's okay. Thank you. So, my understanding of these operators is not that it's just like a dude who runs an app, that they're like actual large companies, right, that are already existing. So can you explain to me what it means when it says principal of an operator applicant or any individual who controls an operator applicant? So is that like a certain level of employee, or is it people who are communicating directly with the state of Vermont, or how specific does that get, or what's the line there? How is it figured out?
Principals and individuals having control will be those officers that have authority to operate the corporation, to run the corporation here. So that would be your CEO, your COOs, your CFOs. If you have authority to direct the corporation, you are either a principal or an individual who has a sufficient level of control to be captured here. In all likelihood, the department, when they're adopting the procedures governing this, are going to provide more detail for the industry to know what their principals and individuals having control are, so that when they apply through the competitive bidding process, there will be a really efficient process for them to submit criminal history background checks. which in all likelihood have already been conducted for other jurisdictions.
Thanks.
Representative Hooper.
The third party provision, I don't know third party provisions that go as deep as VCIC. Is that something that basically is just financial, potentially?
It is not exclusive to financial background. There are some financial background check criteria built into subdivision 1 and 2 there. So for example, the third-party background check is going to be conducted by a consumer reporting agency or background screening company that is in compliance with the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act.
And that's the thing that keyed the question.
Keyed the question. If it meets the minimum standards that the department needs to check the background of the applicant, then they can accept the third-party background check. Otherwise, they're going to go through the BCIC process. For background, there are provisions for both liquor and lottery that allow DLL to establish an information sharing relationship and have contracts with BCIC for purposes of getting background checks for both liquor and lottery. But apparently they're not sufficient enough for them to actually pull the background checks. So there will be conforming amendments later on to make sure that that interpretation will no longer exist and the DLL will be able to pull background checks through BCIC, which is also how this came up. All right, are we all feeling ready to move on to section 1325, crimes and penalties?
I'll chat through that one in a little bit more detail later, but yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah, so this is also from the members of the Judiciary Committee in their floor amendment. This is an update to the crimes and penalties section. If you remember, subsection A was the crimes and penalties that apply to anyone in the world that did not have permission to operate under this chapter. So this is everyone but the operators was subject to subsection A. The committee amended subsection A so that it no longer applies to a person broadly, because they did not want this to apply to individuals. They amended that instead to be a corporation, association, or partnership. That's the exhaustive list of persons or entities that will be subject to these criminal provisions. They didn't want this to be a person in an individual in a bar or in a basement offering sports wagering. They wanted to direct this specifically at corporations that are offering sports wagering in the state illegally.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Oh, no, I think you and I both have the same thought. So they were concerned about the person who is, just taking bets from their friends, having this subject to them. So they wanted to make it really clear. Very interesting. All right.
There are still criminal provisions in Title 13 that apply to the person in the bar or the basement, but not nearly these penalties. And the language that Senate Judiciary used is borrowed from how certain wagering crimes are enforced only against corporations, associations, or partnerships for the use of gambling machines such as slot machines in certain locations unlawfully.
So my question is, if you're dealing with one of the offshore, shady offshore bookie.com, and they're not set up or registered in the United States as a corporation, association, or partnership,
there's no requirement here that these be registered in the United States or in Vermont. This is just that you are a corporate entity, not an individual. That's the distinction being made. And again, would love to know how the state's attorney in Vermont might try to get an offshore operator, but we'll see. The penalties themselves are doubled up.
next section, please, just came through.
Okay. 25 to 50, 75 to 150, 150 to 300. In In 1341, the name of the fund is updated. That was part of the finance amendment. Moving on, in section 1341A, Senate Economic Development condensed down the enumerated uses of the problem gambling program. It eliminated subdivision 3, which allowed the Department of Mental Health to use the funds to establish programs to certify addiction counselors. And they eliminated subdivision 5, which allowed DMH to use the funds to fund a helpline with text messaging and online chat capabilities. They built 2 new subdivisions. They condensed down the rest, which allows mental health to use the funds for promoting public awareness of providing education on gambling addiction and assistance programs for gambling addiction.
I assume that the Department of Mental Health testified favorably on that.
I was not there for DMH testimony.
Check with DMH, I'm interested.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I'm checking with DMH.
Thank you, Representative Byron.
All right, we're coming to the end here. This is section 2A next, the appropriations section of the bill. Senate Appropriations amended this section to eliminate the set amounts for fiscal year 2025 for the problem gambling program and to add an appropriation for ADS. So to quickly walk through, for fiscal year 2024, $250,000 goes to the Department of Mental Health. That was the proposal that left the House. It stays in place. $550,000 goes to DLL in anticipation of receipts. So that would be the fees that will come in. That stays in place as well. Subdivision A3, brand new, $100,000 to ADS so that they can build the self-exclusion program. Subsection B, this is going to require first that the appropriation made for FY 2024 is going to be combined with the state lottery fund monies that are dedicated to the same purpose. So they're combining the state lottery's problem gambling funds with the funds appropriated for FY 2024. Any MOU that's formed for combining those funds has to be made in consultation with the Chief Prevention Officer. Moving into subdivisions 1 and 2. This is going to require that before January of next year, mental health, DLL, and the Chief Prevention Officer are going to report to the General Assembly on the status of the program's funding, and the projected use of the program for the next year. The report is going to detail how the program funding aligns with other similar programs. And appropriations was looking at things like substance use funding, tobacco cessation funding, things along those lines. The report that is required by that subsection is going to include recommendations for allocations for problem gambling programs for FY 2025 in the form of a specific appropriation amount, and for FY 2026 and thereafter in the form of a recommended minimum appropriation or percentage of revenue from each enterprise fund. So no set amount for 25, but a recommendation from 2 agencies and the Chief Prevention Officer on how they're going to mingle funds and what they would need for the next year. And it's like left in subsection C, but that actually was superseded by the appropriations amendment. So my apologies that that's still in there.
C.
Yeah, subsection C no longer exists. All right, section 3 and section 4 are redesignated, and in their place, there are provisions from a finance amendment and a judiciary amendment. First, 31 BSA 655 related to lottery functions. This is going to allow DLL to acquire those background checks from BCIC for sports wagering. in the new section 4, this is an amendment to the, a section related to Vermont income tax. And what you're seeing there in subdivision B6 is the inclusion of sports wagering, proceeds from sports wagering transactions in the subdivision that applies Vermont's income tax to lottery proceeds. So just like you will pay Vermont income tax if you buy a lottery ticket in Vermont and win, you will have to pay Vermont income tax if you place your wager in the state and win.
Does it specifically say wagering and not something like legal sports wagering for a reason?
Yes, to be broad enough that it will capture wagering in all its legal forms.
So how would a non-resident who places a legal bet via a platform, a ski trip or whatever?
Mhm.
So would income tax? How would they know?
What do you mean?
Yeah, I guess the question is just like, how do they know that they have to pay
Oh,
on that to the state of Vermont since the wager was?
Well, if you go to the end of the subdivision, there's authority for the commissioner of taxes to require, in this case, the state with the lottery and the state and the operators for sports wagering to withhold Vermont's income tax that will be applied to a winning wager. So in all likelihood, the customer is going to get notice from the operators that any winnings will be subject to Vermont income tax. But also when the winnings are paid out, if the commissioner takes this step, there will be a withholding of Vermont income tax wager that's paid out.
Is there any discussion about like setting a threshold? I know Ways and Means is probably going to get into this, but where, sort of smaller de minimis amounts wouldn't have anything like that. But when we're talking about, you're getting $10,000 of winnings or $20,000 of winnings, then they start looking at that.
There was discussion of that, but only in the context of what are we doing with lottery now and what is that amount? And the commissioner testified on that. I can't remember the figure. I know anecdotally that it's $600 is the maximum that you can get from a retail location. And after that, you have to go through DLL or there's, I think, one bank in the state that's authorized to pay out those transactions. And that's where withholdings kick in.
All right. Well, go ahead, Representative Hooper.
If we're finished with that section, go back to the BCIC one. Just to clarify something, sticks in my mind that at least with the Department of Social Services, SRS, DCF, you could
you're dating yourself.
Yeah, I know. I'm having a good time. VCIC information was available, but NCIC information was not available because of a contract that VCIC had with NCIC. So when we talk about going so far as into FBI records here, is there something that has changed in the last 10 years?
I am not sure, but this is the authority that, for example, the Cannabis Control Board has. It's the exact same language that allows the CCB to pull both VCIC and FBI records.
Or try to.
Or try to.
Thank you.
Questions about Senate's proposal amendment to 127 for Tucker? All right, we will take a little testimony on this. I know our colleagues Ways and Means to see it. Representative Byron, I'm going to do a little research. I think just time-wise, I would love to understand what they did and find our way to concur, but to do our due diligence here. I know it's like there's a lot here, but it seems like in large part the general thrust of what we started with here is still in the bill.
Yeah.
Not too bad. Hopefully we'll find all these to be really great improvements with all of the work. This went through a lot of committees in both chambers. All right. Great committee. Well, thank you for the good work this afternoon. We'll be back up on the floor soon, so hopefully we'll get a few minutes to catch our breath here. So we'll adjourn and go up live for now, and I'll see you upstairs. Thanks.